Total nonviolence. Are these words ringing something in your mind? What about nonviolence? Yeah, we are getting somewhere. Nonviolence was deeply endeared by the late and legendary Mahatma Gandhi. And so did his grandson Arun Gandhi, who have made total nonviolence his motto of life. Being an Indian-American author, socio-political activist, and staunch philanthropist, Arun Gandhi, like his grandfather, showed absolute leadership to crop cruelty, violence, and atrocities in the world at large. Though he garners and harbors the spirit of his grandfather, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Arun Gandhi is another step ahead by embracing world cultures, global civilizations, which includes globe-wide fashion and style to exemplify his cosmopolitan nature. And hence, Arun Gandhi lives like a Roman in Rome, yet has the heart of an innocent child. He has many epithets to showcase as in an author, humanitarian, cosmopolitan, spiritual fundamentalist, and the like. In a very candid, cozy, and a very fluid conversation with the host of Star Darbar, Raagiinii, Arun Gandhi have revealed golden nuggets about his life. His real take on nonviolence, his deeper association with his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, and his collective and strong message to youth of the world. So let's welcome our lovely, honored, and epic guest, Shri Arun Gandhi ji, to our today's very, very, very special episode of Star Darbar. Namaskar, Arun ji.
Namaskar. Thank you for having me on your show.
Guys, we are really excited to have Arunji in Star Darbar here tonight. And yes, Star Darbar is produced by Krish Entertainment and Blue Eye Creation and brought to you by Mana TV International HD all over globally. We're really excited to meet Arunji tonight. And as I told you guys earlier, you all know now who is he. So before we say anything else, we would love to go right into his childhood. And please talk about your childhood and how your grandpa really influenced you.
My grandfather had started his first ashram in South Africa, in a little village called Phoenix. And I was born there. And at that time, there was a lot of prejudice against non-white people. So I suffered a lot of prejudice. And the way the white people, a minority of white people governed the country was by dividing and ruling. They divided the African and the Indian and all the other communities, and they ruled over us. So there was a lot of hate and prejudice. It seemed to me like everybody was hating everybody else. And that sometimes took the form of abuse, in the streets by strangers. And I was beaten up first by some white youths because they thought I was too black. And then some black youths because they thought I was too white. And it filled me with a lot of anger, and I wanted eye for an eye justice. And so it became an obsession with me, and I started going to the gymnasium and doing exercises so I could build up the strength to fight back again. And my parents saw this growing anger in me, and they decided it was time to go to India and hopefully leave me with grandfather and learn something from him. So at the age of 12, I was taken to India And I was left with grandfather for a couple of years. And grandfather saw, um, what was going on. And he started advising me and teaching me. And I think the first most important lesson that he taught me was about understanding anger and being able to use that energy constructively. He told me anger is like electricity. It is just as useful and just as powerful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel anger into our lives and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel anger also in the same way so that we can use that energy for the good of humanity rather than abuse it. And to be able to do that, you've got to have control over your mind. Now, that is something we neglect altogether. We don't teach young people about anger. We don't talk to them about it. We just allow everybody to find their own ways of dealing with it. And the result is that we all end up abusing anger. But we abuse anger because we have no control over our minds. And you'll see that at any given moment, even when we are sitting listening to somebody or whatever, that our mind is filled with dozens of different thoughts racing through all the time. And to that extent, we remain, without control. We are distracted. And in that state of distraction, when we get angry, we just blow up and we say things and do things that sometimes changes the course of our lives completely. So he taught me that we should, just as we do physical exercise, because we want a strong physical body, we must sit in a quiet room for a few minutes every day and hold in front of me something that gave me pleasure to look at. It could be a flower or a photograph or whatever. And for 1 minute, I had to concentrate my full energy on that object and then close my eyes and see how long I could keep that image in my mind. In the beginning, I found that the moment I closed my eyes, the image vanished. And that meant that I had no control over the mind. But when I began to do this exercise regularly every day, I found that I could keep that image longer and longer in my mind. And to that extent, my mind was coming under my control. And once you have control over your mind, then you can stop yourself from doing something stupid that will change your life. Today, I do a lot of work with the prison system here in New York City, New York State. And so many of the prisoners have come to me and said, we wish we could take back what we did and come back to normalcy. But once you have done it, there's nothing you can do to change. So I think this is very important because Harvard University also recently did a study and they found that anger was the reason for more than 80% of the violence that we experience. So imagine if we can learn to control anger and channel that energy constructively, we would reduce violence by as much as 80%.
Really great words, and I hope the youth, not only the youth, the adults are also listening to this point of view. I know that these days we are all changing our thoughts. We are trying gratitude, we're trying mindfulness, we're trying so many things. But here Arunji is sharing his experience with his grandfather, our beloved nation's father, Mahatma Gandhi ji. And these words coming from your mouth, I think, makes a big, it is a huge, different, I think, ideas that people can grab or they can pay attention to, And I understand that being in South Africa, it was really hard for you. But at the same time, let's talk a little bit about nationalities, because you are born in South Africa. So by born, you are a South African, but at the same time, you are an Indian, and then you are brought back to India. So what do you think about nationality and how much it affects us?
I think nationalities are overrated. We are all human beings, whether where we live, what we do is immaterial, whether we are Chinese or Indian or American, we are human beings. That is the primary thing. And as long as we avoid looking at ourselves as human beings and just brand ourselves with nationalities, we are building walls between people. We have enough walls already. We have gender walls and religion walls and economic walls and social walls, and you name it, and we have a wall. Yeah. And every time we build a wall between people, we are creating a potential for conflict. So I don't pay much attention to nationality. I am a human being, and I treat everybody as human beings, wherever they come from, whether they're black, white, yellow, brown, I don't care.
We want to know a little more about your book that you have written. And it is a bestseller, and the topic is really beautiful. I want you to say about it, because I want my viewers to know about that book as well. So please share it.
Yeah, for many years after coming to the United States, I talked about all of these things, lessons that I learned from grandfather and nonviolence and his philosophy and so on. And every time people would ask me, have you written a book? We would like to have a book to be able to read later on. And I kept putting it off because I thought nobody would really be interested, until finally the time came and a publisher saw a copy of a book I had written earlier called The Legacy of Love, which was self-published. And she was very impressed by it, and she got in touch with me and she said, this has to be commercially published. And so it just took off. And Simon and Schuster published it here in the United States, and then I think nearly 15, 18 countries around the world translated it and published it there. So it's quite widely available in Europe and Asia and United States. But it's basically all the lessons that I learned from grandfather and my parents, of course.
The gift of anger, where that came from, like the name of a book. So, so how you really perceive that?
Because I thought that anger is misunderstood. We are so ashamed of anger that we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to learn about it. We ignore it completely. And yet anger is a powerful emotion. It is, like I said earlier, like electricity. It gives us the power and energy to do the right thing. So why should we be ashamed of it? And I think it's a gift. It's not something that we should try to hide.
Do you think that we always talk about ahimsa, we always talk about peace, we always talk about humanity, but in your eyes, what do you think? Are we really projecting it in our life?
No, we are not, because we don't understand it. We talk about peace, but we don't really know what we mean by peace. We think that the absence of war is peace, that because we are not fighting with anybody, we are living in peace. But we are not, because we have created a whole atmosphere, basically an economic system that goes against peace. It is based on exploitation of resources, of people. It is based on greed. Those who can make it grab as much as they can. And it's just growing from bad to worse every year. And the result of all that is that we are dividing the society between the rich and the poor. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And I have come to the conclusion now that the whole industrial base that we have created depends on cheap labor. We need cheap labor to manufacture things and make it affordable for people. In the old days, we enslaved people and exploited them. But then we got rid of slavery. And so where do we get cheap labor from? So now we have found a new way of exploiting people by keeping them in poverty and exploiting them for cheap labor. And that kind of atmosphere, exploiting people and exploiting resources and becoming greedy and selfish and self-centered, it all goes against peace. You can't have peace when you have turmoil in your life. So peace is creating harmony. It's only when we are able to create harmony between people and look at people and respect people as human beings, only then we will have real peace. Until then, we can talk till doomsday for peace and not achieve anything.
Would love to ask you this thing, as we are discussing that you were under the umbrella of our favorite father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi ji, for a couple of years. So we heard that he used to encourage you to play with the neighboring kids, to learn from them, and as well to teach them that what you have learned. How was that? I mean, how you really managed it, and if you can share some stories about it.
That actually was in Phoenix, and it was my parents, not my grandfather.
And okay, Phoenix, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
Phoenix was, as I told you, a small village, and most of the people who lived there were agricultural laborers, mostly African people, very, very poor and very exploited. And so when I was growing up, they were my friends. I would play with them and learn. And my parents would encourage me to learn from them. How do they live in poverty? Where do they get, toys and things? We could go to a shop and go and buy toys when we wanted to entertain ourselves. But where do they get the money to make toys? So learn from them. And I learned how they were so imaginative, that they used their imagination to make toys from scrap material. They would go and pick up things from garbage and turn that into a toy and play with it. So then the next step was that if I'm learning something from them, logically I should teach them something too. And I had the benefit of being able to go to school and learn there. And so my parents said, well, what you learn in school, they will never be able to learn because they can't go to school. So you have got to teach them what you learn every day and, have that kind of exchange. And so we started informally. I would gather my friends and I would start teaching them. And that message got out to people all over. And there was such a thirst for education that soon we had hundreds of people gathering outside our homes, all poor African people begging us to teach their children something. So it just grew into an amazing experience.
Arunji, would love to ask you your experience with Sevagram, and if you can tell others, what is it?
Bapuji started these ashrams because he was convinced that we need to change. I told you about the economic programs and the exploitation and all that. And so he wanted people to come and learn how to live a simple life, how to live, through your own efforts and not exploit other people for what you need. It was kind of self-help program, and it was a major change, from what we are experiencing today, to live a simple life. Bapuji adopted that simple life and clothes, not just to identify himself with the poor people, but also to show that we can live simply and we can live a happy and a nice life without all the luxuries that we want to enjoy. So he had created these ashrams to train people in that effort. So I call his philosophy not so much a philosophy of nonviolence or ahimsa, but a philosophy of change. Because unless we change, ahimsa and nonviolence are going to be meaningless. Mm-hmm. We have to change first, and once we change that, then ahimsa and nonviolence will make sense. Until then, we have become so used to physical violence and passive violence. We think that because we are not fighting, that we are living in peace, but we are not, because because of the circumstances, we are committing so much of passive violence. By passive violence, I mean violence where we don't use any physical force, yet we hurt people. When we discriminate against people, look down on people, we waste resources. I mean, the amount of waste we incur every year, everywhere in the world, is amazing. I read in the New York Times that in the United States alone, we throw away 160 billion, and that is billion with a B, dollars worth of food every year. If the United States can throw away so much food, how much food is going to waste in India and other countries of the world? And yet we have poverty in the world. That is the worst form of passive violence. So as long as we are committing passive violence, we are committing a lot of violence, because it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence.
Mm.
So if logically you want to put out the fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us.
True. And I mean, this is really, really absolutely true what you're saying. And I think that lot of others, they're really working towards that. And I hope that you guys are listening right now to Arunji. Arunji, I would love to ask you this, that suddenly this thing came in my mind that when you were with your grandpa, like, you know, lot of personalities that we see in the history books, or we read the names. Do you remember anybody that you have met around that time, or if you can share a few stories with us?
Yeah, I met most of the leaders of the time, because I was so close to Bapuji, and they would all come to Bapuji for meetings and things. But the closest I got to was Jawaharlal Nehru.
Mm-hmm.
He took a great liking for the family, and so even after Bapuji passed away and Nehru became the prime minister, as long as he was alive, he always kept in touch, and insisted that I should, write to him every month about the family and what's happening and all that. So he was very close to us. And there is some humorous incidents with him. I remember this was in Pune, and Bapuji was undergoing nature cure treatment there for blood pressure. And they had the Congress Working Committee meeting in Pune. And Nehru was living in that nature cure center near Bapuji. And one morning I was sitting outside in the garden waiting for breakfast time. And suddenly I found somebody come from behind me and put their arms on my shoulders. And I looked up, and it was Panditji. And he asked me, "Have you had breakfast?" And I said, "No, I have not yet. I'm waiting for breakfast."
How used to spend your day with your grandpa? Because I felt that he used to be very, very, very disciplined, right? So how like his day used to start and finish?
Well, he was very disciplined. He had made me draw a program for the day, right from the time I got up to the time I went to bed. I had to be able to account for every hour of the day. It included playtime, but it had to be specific. You can't say that I don't have anything to do and just killing time. He said, we don't have the luxury of killing time. We've got to use every minute of the day properly. So it was a very structured day. Getting up in the morning, going to the prayer meeting at 5 o'clock in the morning. After prayers, I had to do my yoga exercises. After yoga, I had to clean up the ashram. And boys and men, young men, were entrusted with cleaning the toilets. They had those bucket toilets, and we had to carry those buckets into the garden and empty them and wash them and line them with hay inside and put them back for use. So all that, and then having a bath, and then having breakfast, and then lesson time. It was very, very structured time.
Thank you so much, Arunji. You know what? The time is short and we have to say goodbye to our viewers for tonight. And I promise that we are going to come back with Arunji next week as well. And we are going to celebrate peace and love with him one more time. Until then, I just want to say good night, everybody, and have a great week. If you missed tonight's episode, I hope you did not. But if you did, please come and join us for our Facebook page, that's Mana TV, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel, that's also Mana TV. And yes, this program was brought to you by Mana TV International HD, and of course, produced by Krish Entertainment and Blue Eye Creation. Till then, till next week, see you again. Good night, and have a safe and healthy week.